start?
I've just started.
Perfect.
Just started now. Yeah.
Amazing. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss pressing that button. Um, well, lovely to be here with you all today. And for those of you that are watching outside of the session, lovely that you are watching on catch up as well. My name's Laura Earnshaw. I'm the founder and CEO here at My Happy Mind. I have another couple of hats as well that I wear. One of them is that I am a fellow on NHS England's National Innovation Accelerator programme, which is a bit of a mouthful. But it basically means that we're a program that's being kind of endorsed and encouraged for adoption and spread across the NHS. I also sit on the board of the Mental Health Foundation as a trustee, which is a charity that I'm sure you will have all heard of and come across. And I'm also on the board of NHS Confed's Mental Health Advisory Board as well. So I kind of play lots of hats. But what I'm really delighted to be here to do today is to tell you a bit more about My Happy Mind and specifically how we support neuroinclusion and really try and bring some of the key philosophies and key strategies that we're teaching in schools to life for you, so that whether you're a My Happy Mind school or not, you can hopefully take something away that's going to be really valuable for you. My colleague Sam joins me here today as well and will be in the chat for those of you that are here live if you've got questions or comments along the way. And we're both available after today's session to be contacted if you've got further questions or things you'd like to discuss. So let's dive in. I'm going to start by telling you a bit about us as an organisation. So we're very proud to be an award-winning organisation. Most recently, we were given an award by His Majesty the King himself, which was very exciting. Got to go to Windsor Castle to meet him. But essentially what we do is we provide programmes to schools, to early years settings and to families that support them to develop positive cultures around mental health and well-being and that encourage them to take inclusion really, really seriously. So everything we do is based in both neuroscience and positive psychology. And to give you a sense of our scale, we're working in about 2,000 schools nationally, and we're commissioned in over 40 different places or kind of ICB areas across the UK. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about our philosophy, but as I do this, really draw out some of the key factors that I think are really critical when it comes to neuroinclusion in schools and how programs or pieces of work need to really consider these 5 different factors in order to have the most impact. So the first is a philosophy around this concept of proactivity and not just reactivity. And really what we're talking about here is the fact that true inclusion means that everybody receives an education around whether it's mental health and well-being or neurodiversity, not just those children who might be categorised as needing it. So I often talk about this concept that in any one classroom, you've really got 3 cohorts of children. You've got children who may have a need of some description, and we know they have a need of some description, whether that's an SEMH need or whatever it might be. You've got children who have a need, but we don't know that they have a need because they're masking effectively or they're pre-diagnosis. And then you've got children who are thriving, who don't necessarily have a need. And it's our strong, I guess, conviction that whatever cohort a child might fall into, they are all as deserving of receiving a really positive, inclusive education around their mental health and well-being. And so for that reason, My Happy Mind gets taught to every single child in a school, not just children who might be considered to be at the point of need. The next piece around this is around equitable access. So it's one thing to say that all children should receive this education, but what's really critical is that the education is appropriate for all children to receive it. And true inclusion, we believe, requires organisations to have really considered and put thought into how their resources will be received. And so here at My Happy Mind, what that looks like is that we've done a lot of work around ensuring that our resources in our programme are easy to access for all children, whether they might be neurodivergent, whether they might have be partially sighted or be hard of hearing. We believe that it's important that the resource has considered all of those things, as opposed to just having a blanket resource that's not considered any of them. And so this idea around equity of access has to extend beyond just giving it to everybody. It has to have considered how that resource will be delivered and what that resource looks and feels like for it to be truly inclusive. And all of this really is coming back to this point around stigma reversing that we think is absolutely critical. And we all know, don't we, that there's still huge stigma around neurodivergence, around mental health, social and emotional mental health needs. It's still very much there. And actually, we believe that the only way you reverse that is by educating all. But for us, that isn't just about educating all children. It's also about getting to all staff within a setting and to all parents as well. And that's why we think it's really important that to be truly inclusive, we've got to also ensure that programmes are not just made available to children, but also to staff and also to parents and carers. And that's why My Happy Mind takes this very systemic approach. And what that means is that there's a digital programme for all children in the school that's neuroinclusive, but there's also a staff wellbeing programme and a staff CPD section as well. And then there's also parent and carer an app for them to access outside of school so that they're also going on the journey with their child. And throughout all of those resources, those same concepts that I've just walked through apply in terms of how the content is delivered, making sure that that's really equitable in terms of the access, and making sure it's available to all, so that we're really taking this very systemic approach to education and change. And then the final point that again we think is really important is that we're able to make this resource fun for the children to learn about and to engage with, and really easy for teachers to deliver. So our model, which again we think is a little bit of our secret sauce in terms of the culture shift that we're able to enact in schools, which we think is absolutely critical to really change the direction of the crisis we're in with neuroinclusion and with mental health as well. We think it's really important that teachers deliver the content. And we think that's really important because that's how you change the culture in the classroom. But in order to ask teachers to do even more, it's got to be really easy for them to deliver. And so this idea of it being fun to learn for the children and easy to teach for the teachers is at the core of what we do and what we think is really important others do as well. And I'll show you in just a second how we do that. So what I thought I'd spend a little bit of time on now is the content that we teach, and whether you're a My Happy Mind school now or you're not, and whether you'd like to be in the future. I hope that for each of the areas I'm going to walk through, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of insight and hopefully a little bit of inspiration of something that you can actually take away and use. So the crazy gang of characters who've just made their grand entrance on screen on the left are very much a core part of our programme, and we use them in the programme up until year 4. And then in year 5 and year 6 in our primary programme, we transition to a slightly older look and feel with our branding. And we do that because, as you will all know, around that age, the children can get a little bit too cool for school. So it's really important that we kind of grow up the branding as we go. But the characters play a really key role to put a smile on the faces of the children, so that when they're coming into a My Happy Mind interaction, they're doing so and believing this is going to be a fun and enjoyable experience. Because as we all know, if children go into an interaction expecting it to be fun and engaging, they're much more likely to learn and to engage with that resource. So that's the job of the characters, which they do very well. The characters also come in teddy bears that we send out to our schools. They exist in storybooks, and they very much narrate the content as we go through. And I'll touch on some of that in a moment when I share the tool itself with you, just to bring all of this to life. And then on the right-hand side of this screen, what you can see is what we call the My Happy Mind system. And this is the framework of content that we teach in all of our programs. And what I thought I would do is step through each of the modules and share the kind of the science and the research behind why we teach what we teach, but then in particular pull out why we think that's really important from a neuro-inclusive perspective. So the first module that we teach is called Meet Your Brain. And Meet Your Brain is one of the foundational, I guess, principles of My Happy Mind, because it's where we start to teach children all about how their brain works. And I'm just looking for a little prop that I think my daughter has moved. So Sam, if you wouldn't mind coming off screen, or coming off camera off with Team Hap, that would be really helpful. And you can be my glamorous assistant, and share how this works. But you may have noticed on the screen that there's a three-headed character called Hap. And this is the character that we use to explain the brain. And so I'm going to talk you through how we do this, so that you can really understand kind of what the children experience. So as you can see, Team Hap has got three heads, and each of his heads represents a different part of the brain. So we've got the H for hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that stores all of our memories and everything that we learn. You've then got the A for amygdala, which is the part of our brain that keeps us safe, and it will fight, flight, or freeze when we sense danger. And then you've got the P for prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that helps us to make choices and decisions. And what the children learn is that
we'll let you in shortly.
And what the children learn is that, like with any team, Team Hap work best when they're working together. So when we can access our memories in our hippocampus, and we can make good choices from our prefrontal cortex, and we can stay safe in our amygdala, that's when we're likely to be our best selves. And that's what generally happens when we're feeling happy, safe, and calm. But sometimes, if we're feeling a bit sad or a bit stressed or a bit worried, what can happen is our amygdala in the middle can interpret that as a threat or a danger. And so it takes control to keep us safe because that's its only job. And what the amygdala actually does is it sends oxygen into our arms and legs, ready to fight, flight, or freeze. And because of that oxygen flooding out of our brain into our body, our hippocampus, where our memories are stored, falls asleep because there's no oxygen for him. And so does our prefrontal cortex, where we make choices and decisions from. So actually, in those moments when we're feeling sad or stressed or worried about something, the only bit of our brain that's actually awake, that's actually doing anything, is our amygdala, which is why our only responses are to either fight, flight, or freeze. It's not our fault, it's just our brain doing what our brain does. And so then what we teach the children is that when we're feeling like that, and our amygdala's taken control, what we need to do is wake up our hippocampus so we can recall memories again, and wake up our prefrontal cortex so we can make decisions again. And the only way we can do that is through sending oxygen back up to the brain to wake them up. And the only way we can do that is through something called happy breathing, which is the self-regulation strategy that we then go on to teach. And what's really fascinating about this, in particular for our neurodivergent learners, is that by explaining emotions and the brain in this way, which is, as you probably noticed, a very logical and a very kind of black and white way of thinking about it, they get it in a way that often schools tell us they never have before. In fact, to the extent that we often have schools telling us that their children are saying, Miss, my amygdala's taken over, I need to do my happy breathing, which is just fantastic. And actually using that scientific vocabulary and not shying away from it is, again, really, really powerful, because all of a sudden it's science. It's not emotions, it's not fluffy, it's not hard to grasp, it's scientific. It happens to everybody. And I just need to learn how to manage that for myself. So really, really powerful to be teaching this science to children who perhaps have struggled to understand emotion or struggle to understand why they sometimes react in the way that they do. And something else really powerful happens as well. And this links back to the reason we're so passionate about teaching this to every single child, whether they are neurodivergent or not. And what that is shared empathy. Because when children who are neurotypical start to learn about this, all of a sudden they start to understand and have a much greater sense of empathy as to why their friend, who perhaps is neurodivergent, sometimes has a bigger reaction in some situations that trigger their amygdala than they do. And so all of a sudden you start building this kind of empathy, this ability to kind of co-regulate, and this real understanding between pupils and within the classroom of what's actually going on for each child. So it's incredibly powerful, and again, really kind of underscores the need for this to be taught to everybody, which is why it's so powerful as part of the PINS approach. The next thing that we do is we start to really help children to understand who they are and really get them to a place where they not just understand who they are, but they celebrate who they are. And we think that this is, again, really foundational and really critical actually to building that strong sense of self and really helping to children to understand that they are all special and unique, and that's fantastic. And what's really fascinating about the science of self-esteem, which is really well researched and really well documented, is that what it tells us is that the only way you build self-esteem in a child, or as it happens in adults as well, is to help them to feel good about their character. It's not about celebrating their competence or what they're good at. In fact, that doesn't build self-esteem for the long term. What builds self-esteem for the long term is understanding who I am and what's special and unique about me. So for some children, that might be their humour or their curiosity or their kindness. For other children, it might be their determination or their love of learning. We've all got these different unique character strengths, but often children don't know what theirs are. And so what we do is we get children to a place where they can articulate what their unique character strengths are and really celebrate that about themselves. And as then they progress then up through the year groups, they start to be able to notice character strengths in others and celebrate others for their character strengths. And really what we're doing here, which again is really powerful, particularly for neuroinclusion, is we're introducing almost a new framework by which children self-identify. Because we all know that children will often talk about themselves through the lens of competence. So they might say something like, oh, hi, I'm Billy. I'm brilliant at football, but I'm a rubbish reader. Both competence-based definitions of self. But in this new world, if you can imagine, that child might start to say, hi, I'm Billy and I'm really funny and I love to learn. So it's a very different framework against which children start to understand and talk about themselves. And it moves children away from unhelpful labels around, for example, their competence or indeed their neurodiversity. So whether they might be autistic or dyslexic or whatever it might be for that particular child. So again, a really powerful tool that by teaching every child this new framework against which they can then self-identify, you're moving away from labels and unhelpful terms that might not be helping a child to feel included. The other thing they learn in this module is that when we think about and we use our character strengths, that's when we get into flow. That's when we feel at our best self, and that's when we show up as our best selves. They also learn about the fact that when we do that, we get these happy hormones released in our brain. And so it becomes a very kind of positive cycle that if you use your character strengths, you feel good and then you do good. And that becomes this kind of virtuous circle. The next piece is around appreciate, which is all focused around the science of gratitude. And I'm sure you will all be very well versed in the fact that gratitude is well known to be one of the most powerful tools we have actually to take control of our own well-being. And again, the science is really well documented, but in an essence, what it tells us is that those of us who take time to think about what we're grateful for on a regular basis are happier than those of us that don't. And the reason for that is that when we think about what we're grateful for, we get all of these amazing happy hormones released in our brain. And one of the things that's really powerful about that is that we get just as much dopamine released in the brain when we give gratitude to somebody else as we do when we receive it. So it's a really, really powerful win-win for us to be thinking about how do we build our habit of gratitude. So when I say to Leslie after this session, Leslie, thank you so much for inviting me to do this training session. I really enjoyed it. That makes me feel good because I'm giving the gratitude, but it also makes Leslie feel good as well. So what we teach children about is the fact that actually gratitude is an ultimate win-win. And why that's really important is that when we learn to tune into what we're grateful for, particularly about other people, which is where we focus a lot of this dialogue, what actually happens is that we start to appreciate their strengths more. And when we start to appreciate people's strengths more, we start to appreciate their diversity more. And that's really important for inclusion. So all of a sudden, children might start to notice their peer group who might be neurodivergent for the things that are superpowers within that. So maybe they start to notice a dyslexic child's creativity, Or maybe they start to notice their autistic friends' ability to recall immense detail or to see patterns that perhaps they can't. And so by giving children this tool of gratitude, you're not only building their well-being, but you're helping them to spot difference and be grateful for difference, which leads to greater acceptance, which leads to greater inclusion. The next area that we think is really important is around building positive relationships. And critical to being able to build positive relationships, particularly with children who might be different from us, is being able to understand and appreciate difference. So you can imagine by this point in the programme, we've done some really good foundational work here. But where we extend this in the Relate module is by really focusing on helping children to understand some of those foundational skills around how do I build relationships and how do I get along with others. So there's lots of work in here around active listening, around recognizing difference and understanding difference and frankly tolerating difference. And what we're able to do through this work, because we've set some of those other foundations up, is do lots of kind of role play and exploration of difference in a very meaningful way for children. So, let me give you an example of this. Imagine it's a Tuesday and we're in the second half term of the academic year. And there's a new little boy who has started in year 3. And it's playtime, and he's kind of stood in the corner of the playground on his own. Imagine a child that's got kindness as their top character strength, and they know that about themselves because they learnt that in the Celebrate module. They might go over to that new boy and say, "Are you okay? Or do you want to come and play with us?" Because they would lead in with their kindness strength. It's just who they are. You might have another child whose top character strength is humour. Their response might be to go over to the little boy and try and make him laugh, do something funny or tell him a joke. And then you might have another child whose top character strength is curiosity. And that child might go over to the new boy and ask him loads of questions about what school he went to before, or does he have any brothers or sisters, or whatever is he into, what games does he like to play, etc. And actually what we start to do is build this understanding that everybody responds and reacts differently in situations because we've all got these different character strengths. And that's not a bad thing. That's not something to be scared of or judgmental about. It's actually something to celebrate, because it's because of our differences that we're able to be special and unique and have these different responses. And that's something to be positive about, not something to be negative about. So hopefully you can start to see how by introducing a positive framework around how children think about themselves, it really supports them then in understanding difference and building those relationships. And then the final area that we think is, again, really important in the context of supporting inclusion is around really helping to build children's understanding of resilience and perseverance. So I think it's really interesting that as adults, we often talk to children the most, and I'm generalizing here to make a point, but we often talk to children the most about being more resilient or persevering more when they're struggling or they're having a really hard time with something. And that's natural, because in those moments we want to help children to feel like they can keep going and achieve whatever it is they're striving to achieve. But actually, what we know is that children are most likely to persevere not when they're struggling, but when they're thriving. And when they're moving towards a goal that they care about, that's when they're most likely to keep practicing it and keep persevering, because they're internally motivated to do so. So what we do in this module and in this part of our programme, which is something that's very transferable into schools that may not have My Happy Mind, is we get children setting what we like to call big dream goals. And these are goals that the child is passionate about, not things that school want them to work towards, or maybe mum and dad want them to work towards, but things that they care about. And as we will know, often with children who are neurodivergent, these can take all different shapes and forms. And I can say that with some experience because I've got 2 of those little people in my own home. But what we try and do is we get all children setting goals that they care about. It might be learning how to do 20 keepy uppies with a football. It might be building a tall Lego tower. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's the child's goal. But in focusing them on working towards a goal that they care about, what you're able to do is give children their own evidence that they already have this skill of perseverance. And then when they're struggling with something, teachers can simply remind them that they already have that skill because they used it when they were pursuing that goal that they really cared about. And I think this is particularly powerful as a strategy for neurodivergent children who may struggle with some of the goals that often get set in school. But if you can instead give that child the opportunity to set their own goal within the school environment, they will build that confidence, that resilience, and that perseverance, which will in turn build their self-esteem. So hopefully that's been a bit of a lens into some of the strategies that we use that, again, you can pick up and take away and use whether you're a My Happy Mind school or not. Of course, we'd love you to be My Happy Mind schools if you're not already, but hopefully it's given you enough that you can take away and kind of framed some of why we think those philosophies around getting to every child, not just the children who may have a need, is so, so powerful. So what I'm going to do very quickly is just show you what the tool looks like for those of you that haven't seen it before, but then just share some of the very specific feedback we've had from our other PINS areas and PINS schools around the type of impact that My Happy Mind is having. So just moving on to the next slide. What you can see here is the My Happy Mind portal, which is what schools will be accessing if they're delivering the programme. And this is just an example of a year one lesson. So you can see how it kind of looks and feels. Teachers are in complete control of the pace of this lesson using the little green button on the bottom right hand corner there. So they're in control, but the lesson's pre-made, as you can see, and it's jam-packed with activities and games and quizzes, and is very much focused on ensuring that the teacher doesn't have to do a whole load of prep and can instead be focused on bringing this to life and tailoring it to the cohort that they are with. So there's a different curriculum for each year group, and the portal contains pretty much every resource a school could ever need, whether it's display packs, parent presentations, interactive games, things for breakfast clubs, lunchtime clubs, after school clubs, you name it, it's in there. There's then the parent, before I get to that, actually, we then have a range of specialist toolkits. And these have been developed with very much the needs of schools in mind. So what we do each year is we listen to the feedback we've had from our 2,000 or so schools and the needs that are coming through from commissioners, and we build what we call specialist toolkits into the programme. So most recently, we've created one around EBSA and one around speech and language therapy and trauma-informed practice as well. And we've done this because the feedback we're hearing is there's a great level of need, an escalating level of need in these areas. And actually, services are so stretched that children are having to wait too long to access them. So we don't intend to replace any services, but instead to say, OK, what can we give the schools that helps them to take those next one or two next steps with that child or with that family to support them whilst they're waiting for some of those services. So the speech and language toolkit in particular has gone down an absolute storm with our schools. We developed that with a speech and language therapist in-house. And again, it just gives schools some trusted resources that they can be using with children in the interim. And then you can see some of our lovely physical resources there. So every child receives a colour printed journal. Again, we find particularly for our neurodiverse children, that's a really, really powerful tool for them to be able to reflect and capture their thoughts if they don't feel comfortable verbalising them. And then there's some of our lovely characters there as well, being held on too tight by those lovely children. There's then the Parent app, which contains information for parents about the concepts that we're teaching to children. It contains masterclasses on those key areas like separation anxiety, like EBSA, speech and language. There's also lots of resources in there around transition, which again, we know that neurodivergent children in particular can often struggle with, and lots of other things as well. And then there's some resources that parents can, if they choose to, share with their child. So games and activities that they can use at home. Again, particular hits in here are some of the breathing exercises that we teach being used at home, particularly some of the ones around sleep, are very, very popular with our families. And then finally, the staff wellbeing content, which again is all accessed via the portal and follows those same 5 modules. So we have teachers in all of our schools doing character strength surveys to learn what their own character strengths are, for example. So a really powerful offer for schools who want to invest in their own team's wellbeing. along with all of that CPD that I've mentioned already. But I'm going to skip forward now just to talk a little bit about how we measure impact, and then share some of the amazing feedback we've had from some of our schools, particularly around neuroinclusion. So we've done quite a lot of work around our return on investment. And so I'm just going to very quickly trot through some of this. So in Cheshire West, we were able to prove an almost 19 return on investment from the investment into schools, and this is based on things like reductions in referrals to CAMS, mental health support teams, improvements in attendance, and so on and so forth. So I won't go through the detail of that because I want to leave some time for questions. But very happy to share this afterwards, as we've said. We've also had the University of Chester independently validate all of our data. And as you can see in this quote, they talk about the fact that they have proven that we are delivering really positive behaviour changes in schools, which is strengthening pupil mental health, resilience and well-being, which is obviously fantastic to see, and that it's absolutely in line with the health and education priorities of the NHS, which is great. And now let's get to the stories, because this is always my favourite bit to share. And again, there's more in here than I will walk through in the interest of time. But I think just some really nice quotes to pull out here. So this first one, I think is really nice. It talks about the fact that My Happy Mind is helping neurodiverse children to express themselves without feeling different to others. So this talks to the fact that the programme is delivered to everybody. So it includes them in the lessons to a full extent. All of the children were introduced to My Happy Mind in an engaging assembly, which we provide. All staff are supportive in implementing a new approach to PSHE and are really excited when teaching the lessons. And then goes on to talk about how great the resources are, and how fun it is to teach, which is obviously what we want to hear. Another lovely story here from a teacher about a child with ASD. And they talk about how they can easily show signs of fight, flight or freeze, but having learned about how Team HAP work together to help take back control, it's really helped this child to regulate his feelings and actions. So when this child now flips his lid, he recognises that he needs to take time to do the happy breathing. At first, an adult would co-regulate with him and do the happy breathing together, but once he's relaxed, he would talk through how his amygdala had flipped and taken over. And then he was able to kind of talk about how the happy breathing had enabled him to regulate. So really demonstrating how that explanation of Team HAP is really, really powerful, and something that he will then keep with him. And they go on to talk about how it becomes a technique that the child knows they can use when they're feeling agitated, frustrated or annoyed, which is fantastic. Another one here, just talking about how smoothly the programme has been launched, but also the fact that they've got an autism unit in their school. And because the lessons are so accessible, the children have been able to join their class for their My Happy Mind lessons, which again is just fantastic to see that actually those children who are in the autism unit are able to go back into their class to do My Happy Mind, which is absolutely fabulous and music to our ears. There's another quote here, again, touching on ASD and how My Happy Mind has supported them to be able to understand the different parts of their brain, and that they're actually enjoying learning about their brain, which again is, I think, really, really important, and that the use of language is really helpful across the school, and that as a teacher, they're able to use that language within everyday situations, and that they like the animations and quizzes as well. They go on to talk about how children are developing a better understanding of their brain, and that shared language across the school is really being developed. And also goes on to note that the journals are really popular for the children to collect their thoughts. And the last one that I will just finish on, because I could be here all day, is talking about how this school in particular has seen impact with their SEND children, particularly those in the resource base, where they're supporting children with autism and additional needs. They talk about how the structured, visual and interactive approach of the programme makes the lessons very accessible, and the children have responded really positively, which I just think is so key. They love engaging with the characters and the stories, gives them relatable and concrete strategies to support their emotional regulation. One child who also spends time in mainstream lessons recently spoke about Team HAP and how they work together to create happiness, which was really demonstrating their understanding of our message. They've also talked about how they've seen children using the self-regulation that we teach outside of My Happy Mind lessons, which of course is really key. A child in year 5 who's currently being monitored for autism was seen standing in a corridor using happy breathing to calm himself down before continuing with a school trip. This ability to independently recognise emotions and proactively manage them is a testament to how we've embedded My Happy Mind. So again, I think just a really powerful place to end on. So I will stop sharing there. Hopefully that's been a useful session and has offered some insight and inspiration, but very happy to take any comments or any questions.
Helen, if we stop the recording now, because people may not want to